Ken Trahan with Lenny Vangilder. It's our First NBC Bank Weekend Review, brought to you by First NBC Bank with 39 locations throughout southeast Louisiana and into the Florida Panhandle. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. It's an extended weekend because the Saints played on Monday Night Football, or at least they tried to play, but not very well, and got beat by the Atlanta Falcons. And this season is really disintegrating quickly, Lenny. When you look at this football team, when you combine the lack of talent, the injuries, and a football team that clearly doesn't have an identity and really can't figure out what it is that they have to do to win, this looks like it's going to be a bad season.
It could well be. I think I said right before the season started, I would think 5 wins could be the high point for this team. That might be getting optimistic at this point, because what we saw on Monday night was very simply a defense that is depleted right now. You've already been depleted at cornerback. Kenny Vaccaro did not play. Obviously, you've had issues on the defensive line as well. Ellerby continues to be out at linebacker. So, you're playing guys that, really could be still on the street at this point. Not just backups. They could just be street free agents sitting out there, and they're the guys that you're asking to make plays. And Matt Ryan and company took care of that to the tune of 45 points on Monday night. And look, now you've got a short week, and you've got to travel clear to San Diego, which is a Friday trip for the Saints. This is really a condensed week to get ready to play a Chargers team that's not too bad either. And all of a sudden, 0-4 going into the bye looks like a real possibility.
Yeah, a Chargers team that could have won a few but doesn't want to win either. And Drew Brees goes home for the first time since he left San Diego to play against the Chargers in his other home, so to speak. So we'll see how that works out. The Saints without Tyler Davis and, of course, already without Rankins up front. And then in the back, as Lenny mentioned, without Vaccaro and their top 4 cornerbacks. Still, excuses are for losers. And the bottom line is this kicking game is extraordinarily bad. I know Will Lutz made a 57-yard field goal, but for the second straight week, the kicking game may have cost the Saints a game, because if you go back to the complete and total screw-up early in that game, it very possibly could be 14-0, and as we know, it could be a different game at that point. But that's just utterly ridiculous to see something like that transpire, with a gunner allowing himself to be pushed right into a return man, and then compounding the problem by just absolutely panicking. I don't know what he was doing to try to pick the ball up.
The only thing that I can see in that situation,
he thought somebody touched the ball.
If he thought one of his own players touched the ball and went to pick it up. But that said, you're right. Look, whether you believe in momentum is a big part of sports or not, I happen to think it does. You look at the 2 momentum killers of the last 2 weeks, and that is the blocked field goal and that botched punt return situation that absolutely flipped momentum in those games. And really, in either case, the Saints, while they certainly played it a lot closer against the Giants, they were not able to recover. And the Falcons scored on 6 consecutive possessions. Here's the stat that tells you everything you need to know. Saints had 9 possessions in the game. The first 8 started when the Falcons kicked off into the end zone. So they weren't even getting stops to get punts, turnovers, anything else. The first 8 of the 9 possessions came off of kickoffs.
It's been a big week at LSU, of course, the change in coaches. Kudos to Les Miles, who did a really good job at LSU and deserves all the credit in the world for what he accomplished. But it was time. I think LSU made the right move at this particular point in time, given the circumstances. And what it does is it gives them a chance to already start the process to evaluate who they'd like to try to hire if, in fact, Ed Orgeron doesn't become the permanent coach. And I think that is a possibility. I would call it less than 50%, and I'd call it an outside chance. But if LSU can go great the rest of the year, lose just 1 game or run the table, how could you not give him the opportunity to be the permanent head coach? Otherwise, I think the names are obvious. Everyone's going to talk about Tom Herman and Jimbo Fisher, and understandably so. But there are other names, too, that are popping up. And, again, offensive-minded coaches that are being talked about. And I think that's probably a must where LSU is concerned at this stage.
I think they have to go get an offensive coach. But you brought up the 2 names that everyone is bringing up, and here's the concern that I have. If the next head coach at LSU is not Tom Herman or Jimbo Fisher, this process is going to be determined as a failure. And I think there are some guys who could come in there and at the end of the day be successful, But of course, we're in a society of 24/7 information and what have you done for me lately, and it's a very shortened news cycle, and anything other than those two, I really think, is going to be viewed as an indictment against Joe Alleva, and we haven't even brought up what his future might be in this. If he does not succeed in his search, and look, clearly, this is not all going to be his doing. All you had to do is read the news release that came out Sunday afternoon. It was not Joe Alleva said. It was Joe Alleva in conjunction with King Alexander and members of the LSU Board of Supervisors. This was not a one-man decision. In ordinary cases, that the athletic director is the one who is going to make a decision on the head football coach. That was clearly not the case here. I don't know how the process is going to happen in terms of hiring a coach, but it may not clearly be the case there, and that may tell you everything you need to know about the future of Joe Alleva.
The other three offensive-minded coaches whose names are being bandied about all have what you'd call demerits, so they all have black marks of sorts, from Lane Kiffin and his failures elsewhere before Alabama, to Bobby Petrino and his failures off the field, to Art Briles and his failures in a program, despite the fact that he's a brilliant offensive mind. These guys are all really good offensive coaches, but can you really hire those guys?
No, that's a great question, and I mean you've got to obviously contend with the warts if that's the route you go. Look, you're a lot of them. Cliff Kingsbury, Chris Peterson, Brian Harsin. There are a lot of great offensive minds out there. Look at the way LSU has gone the last two times they've had to hire a coach. They've hired a coach from Power 5 conference, but they've also gotten a guy who's really managed to succeed even though he wasn't necessarily first banana in his own region or top banana. Obviously, when Nick Saban was at Michigan State, Michigan was still the king. And I mean, you expand the region out, Ohio State, Notre Dame, all much bigger programs than Michigan State. Les Miles from Oklahoma State. Obviously, Oklahoma is king, of that state. So that seemed to have worked. Is there someone out there that kind of fits that mold? I would throw the name Mark D'Antonio at you, and that he's a guy who, he's from Michigan State like Saban was. That may not be a bad thing, and obviously, look at the situation up there right now. I mean, still Michigan and Ohio State are the kings, and he's probably getting viewed as the third best program in that conference, if that high.
Yeah. Lost in translation, a 4-overtime win for Tulane over Louisiana Lafayette. Not a great opponent by any stretch, but a big game because of a big crowd, in-state rival, and the way the game played out, historic, and that it was the longest game, obviously, in Tulane history. And when you look at what they were able to do, you got to give them a lot of credit. They're set up to have a very decent season.
Well, it's interesting. Look at where the optimism scale is right now in Southeast Louisiana when it comes to football. Saint, LSU, Tulane's actually trending this way. And the other one I would throw in that bunch, even though they're coming off a loss, is Nichols. Look, I mean, they lost a 1-point game in overtime at South Alabama, a team, by the way, that just a couple weeks ago went on the road and beat Mississippi State. So, look, there's some reason for optimism when it comes to football in Southeast Louisiana.
High school football, another big week, of course, here at SportsNOLA.com and on WHNO TV 20, live football. A great rivalry, the Great American Rivalry Series, Holy Cross and Jesuit. Friday night, 7 p.m., live on WHNO TV 20 and right here at SportsNOLA.com, which should be a great one. And then Thursday night, before that, we got a really good game at SportsNOLA.com on the North Shore.
Yeah, Mandeville and Ponchatoula is about as good as it gets on that side of the lake right now, and that may end up deciding who the district champion is. It's a very good league on the North Shore this year, but Mandeville, Ponchatoula have certainly put themselves in the upper echelon here in the first 4 games of the season. All the North Shore schools playing on Thursday night this week because of the St. Tammany Parish Fair. That's the one week of the year they do that. So a Thursday night special for you here and a really good one at SportsNOLA.com. All
right, a couple of great high school games as part of our coverage here at SportsNOLA.com. Lenny, as always, have a great week.
All right, we'll talk to you later this week.
That's our First NBC Bank Weekend Review, brought to you by First NBC Bank, with 39 locations throughout the New Orleans area and growing. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. He's Lenny. I'm Kenny. Have a great week, and God bless you.